to another episode, a live episode of the Calling It How I See It Sports Pod. Blake Terrence here with you, here to chat some Royals tonight. Feel free to hop into the replies and ask some questions. We'll get to all your replies when we can. We got a lot to cover tonight. Just wrapped up Game 3 of the White Sox series. Carlos Estevez made it interesting, but they got the job done. Now winners of 14 games over 500. I'm really excited tonight to be joined by David Lesky of Inside the Crown. He's a guy who I've listened to on the Kaufman Corner podcast with my old buddy who I used to work for, Surin Petro, a lot lately. Y'all should check out their great work they do on the podcast side of things. And of course, David's most known for his work on Inside the Crown on Substack, or you can also get it in newsletter form where he writes about the Royals, provides some daily recaps and a lot of deep dive analysis. David, thanks so much for joining us today, man.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with a little check on just where the Royals sit, just shy of the quarter game mark. So, I was saying to you, and we were talking about some topics that, the quarter of the season's Dayton Moore, I think, is kind of the one that put that in the Royals lexicon of the fans, you don't want to say too much. You don't want to draw too many conclusions until that quarter game mark. So I feel like even that is a complicated proposition right now because this first quarter's really been a tale of 2-8s. The first 20-ish games of the season, they started this hot streak, if you will, with kind of that final game of the Tiger series in Detroit. They were 8-14. That's the low ball at the quarter mark right now, or just shy of it. They'll get there after game one of the Red Sox series. But David, can you hear us?
I'm losing you, but I got you back. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I was just sitting down to write for tomorrow's newsletter, and I realized they were 8-14 heading into a game against Tarek Skubal. That's not a good spot to be. And here we sit 16 games later, they're 22-16, which is wild. I mean, it's just we talked a lot about it before the season, that the first 23 games were just kind of brutal. Series against, or 6 series against playoff teams and 1 against the Twins who were over 500. I think that's what it was. I might be a little bit off on the numbers there, but really difficult start to the season. And then once you get past those first 23 games, you've got a 16-game stretch against, you got the Rockies and the White Sox. And then in the middle, the Rays, Astros, Orioles. Did I miss anybody? No, I think that's it. And so you feel like, okay, get 10 wins. They got out of they beat Tarek Skubal. They were 9-14. If they go 10-6, they're sitting a game under 500. You feel okay about that, right? I mean, I think you really do. And 15 games into that 16-game stretch, they're 13-2. And I mean, look, I don't any big league team can beat any other big league team, but at this point, when you won the first 3 against the White Sox, your expectation is a sweep. And it's hard to sweep a 4-game series, but that's the expectation. I mean, they have a real shot to be 23-16 going into the series against Boston, who, by the way, turns out they're not as good as we thought. I mean, maybe they are. Maybe they're in a bad stretch too. Because I've said this before. I think the American leagues, particularly, every single team can lose 8 of 10, and every single team but the White Sox can win 8 of 10. It's just there are a lot of flawed teams. So maybe the Red Sox get hot, and I picked them in the World Series before the season, so I obviously think they're better than this. But the Royals have put themselves in a really, really good spot that I don't think anybody could have expected going into that game against Skubal.
So, I mean, if they manage to pull off the sweep tomorrow afternoon and then managed to take the first game of the Red Sox series on Friday at the actual quarter game mark, as much as you can out of 162, they'll have gotten to a 600 winning percentage. They'll be at 24-16. At this quarter mark, I was talking about how it's really, even this quarter has kind of been a tale of 2 halves of a quarter, a tale of 2 8s. Do you feel like the last 8 has erased all the bad juju from the first 8, or do you think there's a middle ground that we have to take in, our quarterly assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think the quality of opponent needs to be taken into account. But and so I do. I mean, if they right now they're 6-0 against the White Sox and Rockies, which is exactly what they should be, right? Like, well, actually, it's probably better than they should be. You can't expect to win every game against a bad team. But they're doing what they're supposed to do. They're taking care of the business on their schedule, which you can't complain about that 100%. But at the same time, I mean, they're cleaning up against bad teams. Again, it's what good teams do, but they struggled against good teams in those first 23 games of the season. But at the same time, they faced the Rays coming off a 5-game winning streak, and they swept them. And then the Rays went and took 2 or 3 from the Yankees. So that's interesting. The Rays are, I don't know that the Rays are the same as a lot of teams, like I mentioned, that can win 8 of 10 or lose 8 of 10 at any time. But I mean, the Rays were playing well, and the Royals took it to them. The Astros had won 5 of 6, I believe, when the Royals played them, and the Royals took 2 of 3. So I don't think it's entirely cleaning up against bad teams, obviously. So I think, they're sitting at 22-16 now. That's probably what they are. I think the pitching is a little better than I expected, which I expected them to be really good, and they're even better. The offense has been worse. There's been some signs, but they just haven't quite gotten there yet. Like even tonight, they had a ton of base runners, just couldn't get the big hit, which has been a season-long issue. Well, actually, it hasn't been a season-long issue because they weren't even getting base runners for a while. But
right.
Since really the Tigers series, they've been getting runners on. I mean, 10 runners in a game is not a huge number, but they've done that. I think it's like 75 or 80% of the game since then. You should score more runs than they have when you're getting 10 plus runners a game. So I think that there's some reason you can, however you want to look at it, you can be optimistic or pessimistic there. But so, yeah, I think that it is a tale of 2 1/8, I guess. But at the same time, it's the whole has probably told the right story about this team. I think that they're, what are they on now? I don't know what the pace is up at 22-16. It was 92 coming into today. 22. Let's do this quick math. 94 win pace. I am at 88 wins. So maybe they're a little above their heads, or maybe the pitching being better means that they're a little bit better than I thought. So yeah, I think they're probably about right. And I think it did. This stretch has, I don't want to say wiped out the first 23 games, but I think it's done enough to kind of regress them back to the mean.
You touched on something there that I want to expand on. I didn't write this down initially, but one of the topics we covered in our last Royals pod was, when they were kind of bottoming out, or they had maybe just started this hot stretch they're on. And we kind of asked the question to ourselves, should we have seen some of this coming? And a big part of the reason I wanted to ask that was exactly what you touched on there, was how, this season, or especially in this hot stretch, they've underperformed offensively where you think they would be, not just because of some of the struggles of some of the players, but also because they're not hitting as well with runners in scoring position. And so I posed the question a couple weeks ago, should we have seen some of the early struggles and some of the regression to the mean coming? Because this was a team that was, first of all, a little bit top heavy. Everybody knows that from the middle, the top 4 carrying the lineup, but also even some of those players were a little dependent on exceptional performance with runners in scoring position. The guy that really we delved into is Vinny Pasquantino, who, certainly is heating up. But, last year, his splits essentially were almost 100 points higher on all his slash lines with runners in scoring position as opposed to his baseline stats. So do you see the offense actually turning a corner? And, do you think they were as bad as they looked in the first half? Where do you think the offense heads from here? Because I see, some improvements in certain areas, but I think it's also worth acknowledging that some of this probably shouldn't be a surprise, because they were dependent, again, on career years, like from even potentially from Bobby Witt Jr., as good as he is, but also some outsized performances in those high stakes situations that most, statisticians will tell you isn't something you can expect to sustain long term, to dramatically outperform your baselines in those clutch situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was some of that. I think the Royals even accounted for that a little bit. And I mean, I've mentioned this a few times, but when Vinny Pasquantino went down last year, up through that game, the Royals were 5th in baseball in runs scored, on the backs of some pretty crazy hitting with runners in scoring position. So yes, there was a lot of that, but where the Royals hedged it was they went out and got a true leadoff hitter, because the Royals leadoff hitter on base percentage last year was 270, I think. I've written it a couple times.
Yeah, it's well below 300. I know that.
Yeah, I think it was 270, 272, something like that, which, if I remember correctly, is the worst leadoff on base percentage in the last 10 years, or maybe it's one of the 3 worst, something like that. So I think their thought process was, hey, we're going to regress. Like, this is not going to happen again, and if it does, great, but it's not going to. So let's go out and get a guy who actually gets on base ahead of Witt and Pasquantino and Perez. And when they regress, they'll still probably have similar RBI numbers, because they're going to have more guys on in front of them. they've regressed more than that. And I think that now they're probably, the regression is probably going to be a positive regression here pretty soon. Just because I don't think they're this bad either. But yeah, I think this isn't terribly surprising that they've come back to their been. Nah, it's surprising they've been bad. It's not surprising they've fallen off from last season, I think is a better way to put that. So yeah, I think maybe we should have expected some of it, but I also think the Royals mitigated some of that with an acquisition of a leadoff hitter, and India's been okay, and that's part of the problem too. He hasn't been the 370 guy he was last year. The 350 guy has been in his career. His on base percentage I think it's like 325, which is a huge improvement over what they got last year, but it's still not what they thought they were acquiring. And there's time for that to change. Let's see, he's at 331, so not a little higher than I thought. But yeah, I mean, I think that's probably to be expected for a bit of a fall off. But also the other thing too, the fall off. Let's use the numbers with Vinny from 5th in baseball. I think the expectation was, all right, we might be 13th in baseball or 16th and middle third, somewhere in that range. And it just hasn't been there. It's been way worse than that, of course. But, luckily they've got the pitching to back it up while they're trying to figure some things out.
How ironic that even as Jonathan India has not gotten off to the start that we were anticipating, the guy who they were essentially trading for him to move elsewhere in the lineup to get out of the leadoff spot, Mikel Garcia, he might be hitting his way right back into that spot.
He's working back to the top. Yeah, he's and I mean when India gets those days off, Garcia is the one in there, which I mean, it's not the most surprising thing because of how much time he spent there in his career now. But after last season, kind of surprising. But he's again another good game tonight. He looks really good. He's where would they be without Mikel Garcia, right?
Man,
just and if you make that statement without knowing anything, I think if you told somebody that statement and you asked them what the Royals' record is after 38 games, they'd probably say, I don't know, 13-25.
Yeah, not good.
But he's been so good that it actually has been a help to a 22-16 team. So yeah, one quick thing. I was looking this up while we were chatting. Since the start of this, in the last 15 games, well, in the 14 games before tonight, the stats haven't updated yet. The Royals' weighted runs created plus is 117, which is 9th in all of baseball. But in that time, they are 19th in runs scored, and that includes a couple big games. So I mean, it just shows that at some point something's going to even out there, and they're going to score some more runs. I've said this a couple of times before. One day we're going to look up and go, "Oh, they've scored 63 runs in their last 11 games," and it's not going to be like probably not the most noticeable thing in the world. We go, "Oh, they've been fine," and you won't even realize it because it's 6 runs here, 4 runs here, 8 runs here, and it's not like a huge game, but that's. I think we'll look up and see that at some point.
Do you think that's just pure, they've regressed so far the other way that maybe now they'll positively regress back to the middle, and it's just the noise that most people would say comprises, your clutch hitting, the most people would say that just most statisticians, new school folks, it's just stuff that evens out in the long run. Do you think that's all we're seeing? Do you think there's anything actually substantive or something to do with hitting approaches that's causing such wild, pendulum back and forth? What's going on there?
Well, I mean, I haven't looked at this, and I probably should have, honestly. But they keep winning, so it's one of those things. You just start writing about other stuff. So I think the approach probably does have something to do with it. It's a big reason why they go through team-wide slumps. It's because they don't generally. As a general rule in this lineup, there's not good approaches. I mean, even the guys who we thought had good approaches, like Vinny Pasquantino's approach has turned pretty rough in the last year plus. And I have a theory that he's hunting the RBI and doesn't and isn't hunting the pitch. He's hunting the RBI, which it worked for him last year, but probably needs to get back to the pitch, not trying to drive the run in. But so I think that's a big part of it. But I also do think there's some random variance there. And part of it, too, sequencing is a big part of an offense that doesn't get a lot of home runs, right? And like tonight, we saw a couple 2-out rallies. Okay, well, a 1-out rally, you can get a run with an out. A 2-out rally, you can't. You got to get a hit. And for a lot of the season, you had Vinny Pasquantino hitting 3rd, struggling. Salvador Perez hitting 4th, struggling. Michael Massey hitting 5th, struggling. I don't know how you score runs consistently when your 3, 4, 5 aren't doing anything. And Massey is still struggling. He's now hitting 6th when he plays generally. Salvi he was hitting really well before the hip injury, since he's come back, it hasn't been quite as effective, although he did get the double last night. And Vinny's gotten it going, and I don't think it's especially surprising that they've won because they've got Garcia hitting fifth and hitting, Vinny hitting third and hitting, and Salvi hitting fourth and a little up and down, but hitting for a lot of that time. So I think some of it is just that the sequencing isn't there, and they need that, and that leads to a lot of random variance when you don't hit the ball over the wall, like I said.
Yeah. You touched on Michael Massey there, and we talked about Jonathan Indy earlier. Let's kind of merge those discussions. Mikel Garcia might kind of get lumped into this too, but so I've always, this whole season, been a little bit confused about what's going on with Jonathan Indy. Now, there were certainly some mixed reactions to the plan they had of trading for him and immediately talking about defensive versatility and that he may not have a set position and they want to try him at different spots. I know Petro has been not a big fan of that at all since the get-go. His concern from the get-go was, would it affect his offense? Even he will acknowledge that that's one of those things that's really impossible to quantify. It's just something you can't prove. It doesn't make an impact either. And, if you're predisposed to, be worried about that, his lack of, the performance that we would have expected certainly doesn't help that. I think, to me, the part that bothers me more is that even while he has been, good enough to mostly get into the lineup, and Massey has, struggled big time, I don't know about his batted ball metrics. They might be looking a little bit better, but I mean, his baseline stats are in, Hunter Renfroe, MJ Melendez territory right now.
Yeah.
And yet Jonathan India, you might be able to find this specific a stat quicker than I could, but I mean, maybe a couple, but I'm not aware of very many, if any, starts at second base for him this year. He might have a couple, but it's none.
He hasn't even played anything there, and
hasn't played there. And so that is, that to me says there's more going on than just, oh, we think this guy is actually versatile. That looks like you traded for a guy. We knew they traded for him first and foremost because of a leadoff hitter's skill set. But it looks like you traded for a guy who had, basically exclusively in the majors been at one position with no plan to play him there and not much confidence or, whatever, not liking much of his abilities there. Do you think that it's just they're so determined not to give up on Massey? I don't know what that is. Like, why are we not seeing any second base opportunities for Jonathan Indy, even though there looks like there could be a hole there?
Yeah, I think the easy answer is they don't like him there. And I think they never liked him there and thought, okay, we like his bat, we'll figure it out. Because the thing about India that is interesting is I've seen a lot of this is, why is India not playing his natural position? Third base is his natural position.
Yeah.
He played third base in college. He played third base in the minors in 2019 and moved to second base because they had Eugenio Suarez. Now, I don't know why the Reds didn't move him back to third base. Well, maybe I do. I'm looking at the stats. He was, by defensive runs saved, he was league average at second base. And so you go, okay, it's harder to find a second baseman than a third baseman, theoretically. Although Ned Yost would argue there is no third base trees. Who knows? But look at the numbers. Minus 14 the next year, minus 7 in 23, and then minus 10 last year. Now, outs above average had a different story for him last year. He was plus 1. But and outs above average, minus 7, minus 10, and minus 6 in his first 3 years. And so the numbers back up the Royals' assessment that they don't like him at second base. And I think it's as simple as that. And what I found interesting, and I did have to go back through the game logs because I don't remember the exact progression, but they were playing Massey in left a little bit and India in left a little bit. But when India didn't play left, even in spring training, he played second like twice, I want to say. There might have been a third time. It was mostly third base. And this was obviously before Mikel Garcia showed that last year was, part of a nonlinear development. But I was under the impression that India was going to play a lot of third because I'll tell you this, he didn't look good in left field in spring training either. And I was out there in early March and there was a fly ball that if they did StatCast routes on balls in spring training, which maybe they do, I don't know. It would have looked like he was doing a figure 8 to try to get this fly ball, and it was routine. And it was, there were a lot like that. So I think the easy answer is they don't like him at second, which, people don't like to hear that because they traded for second baseman Jonathan India, but I think the Royals traded for leadoff hitter Jonathan India. Let's figure it out. And which isn't the best plan, to be honest. But also, you want to talk about what the Rays do and all that. That's kind of what they do. They get the guy they want and they figure out how to fit him later. Isn't always the way they do it. It's kind of been a little bit of a rough transition, and I think it would be a lot easier if Michael Massey was hitting, because Massey, admittedly, has not rated exceptionally well defensively this year. He's -1 in both DRS and outs above average, but he's been a good second baseman in his career, and I think that we see a really good chemistry with Bobby Witt Jr., which is important too. So he's a better second baseman. If he hit like he did last year, I don't think we'd be having much of this conversation. But the reality is he's sitting there with a 211 on base and 256 slug. And, well, now we're having the conversation because of that.
You seeing anything in Massey's, batted ball data, his approach that makes you feel optimistic? I mean, he did have a pretty horrible April last year too, and we kind of forgot about it.
Most of April last year. It was 2 years
ago.
Oh,
okay.
But yes, he has. Because remember, he had the back injury like the last week of spring training, I feel like, is when it popped up for the first time last year.
Yeah, and I think it knocked him out a couple times.
Yeah, he was out for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe like 3 weeks to start the season. And then I think he missed
maybe some in May.
In the middle of the year, and came back and DH'd a lot.
Right.
He hit last year, not exceptionally well, but reasonably well. And so, yeah, maybe he's a slow starter, and they avoided the slow start last year because he didn't play very much to start the season, which is, look, it's possible. I'm not going to say it's not possible at all. I'm looking right now to pull up his batted ball data. I looked for a little while back, and he had actually been hitting the ball considerably harder. And of course, Baseball Savant doesn't want to work for me right now. But here we go. Since the start of the Astros series, this is actually encouraging. 93.8 average exit velocity, 53.6% hard hit rate, which that doesn't include tonight, obviously. He did have a single tonight. He hit the ball hard, which was good. So in that time, what is that, like 10-ish games or so? He's hit 200 with an expected average of 297. He's slugged 333 with an expected slug of 454. So yes, there are some. That is not like, it's not like the Salvi numbers that he was the difference there. But there are some signs that Massey is starting to look a little bit better. The results just aren't there. It's kind of similar to what Pasquantino had when he started to come out of it a little bit, when he figured out his timing. The expected numbers weren't there for him, or the numbers weren't there for him, but the expected numbers were. And now, back-to-back multi-hit games. I think he's got 4 multi-hit games in May or in the last 8 or something like that. So maybe there's something coming. I kind of get the impression that they're starting to say, okay, does he need a reset in Omaha? Massey, I'm talking about. But it's difficult because the question then becomes, okay, if not him, then who? And the answer is probably Mikel Garcia at second and India at third, because they don't like India at second. But Garcia is not great at second either. And then you get into the back to the chemistry with Bobby Witt. I think that's not insignificant. There's a lot of factors there, and I don't envy the Royals for having to make this decision, but it also is their job, and so they need to get it right.
Yeah, we keep, like I said, we're touching on all elements of this here. I mean, obviously, if he becomes a prototypical leadoff hitter and gets that OBP up near 350, it's going to quiet a lot of the criticism. But how does that affect your calculus on just the long term? I guess it's strictly short and medium term because he's only under control for 2 years. But how does that affect your calculus on the deal to acquire him? Like on a player for player basis, it makes sense. 2 years in arbitration of a pitcher for 2 years of an arbitration hitter, both of whom have kind of flashed, but averaged out to league out. You trade for a guy, and you seem to only have one side of the ball in mind when you make the trade, and then and that's why we talk about different guys within this same conversation, is because it affects everybody else. When Michael Massey struggles, they don't feel comfortable shifting India back to his, what has been his natural position lately. When India can't play there, they got to move Mikel Garcia out of position. I mean, it affects a lot of things beyond just the optics of trading for a guy without a plan for what happens in the other half of the inning. I mean, again, I think, the devil's going to be in the offensive details, but does that affect your calculus of, just the wisdom of acquiring him specifically, even if you like the baseball side of it? Like, if we're talking MLB The Show, or I don't know, you're familiar with Out of the Park Baseball, probably one of the
Oh
more
yeah.
advanced, yeah, in that sense, it always makes sense just on the player profiles. But for the team building standpoint, I wonder, I feel like for me, it has to change the calculus a little bit until we figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, but I also think it's important to remember that a trade involves however many players are in the trade, but there's also more to it. So, like, for example, this trade, the Royals acquired India and Joey Weimer, which could end up being something I wouldn't bet on it, but lottery tickets are nice. For Brady Singer, they made that trade because they felt, okay, we can replace Brady Singer and then some with Chris Bubic. Okay, check, done.
Right.
That's been correct. That's not to say they could have had Chris Bubic and Brady Singer in the rotation because they had a spot. So then they had to go out and they got Michael Lorenzen, who's been fine. He's been probably what you expect from Michael Lorenzen. So it's worked out in that regard. They've opened up the spot, but again, that spot was already open. I don't know if that's a totally fair way to analyze the trade, but I think that was the thought process: is we can trade Brady Singer because we have Chris Bubic. So there's that aspect of it. But yeah, I do think if obviously you look at a trade at, I don't know how many points, multiple points when it's made, and you can make that judgment. And I think that you can safely grade a trade when it's made based on the logic at the time. But I also think that these guys, and going back to things Seren says, they're in the get it right business. And so if they don't get it right, you can also criticize after the fact. It's not, you can't say, well, you can't say anything about this because it made sense at the time. I think that that's a part of the evaluation. But yeah, if Brady Singer, and by the way, he hasn't been especially good outside of his first start. He's had a couple good starts. He's been Brady Singer.
Right.
I mean, he's got a roughly like a 4.5 ERA and a 4.5 FIP or so since his first start. Which, okay, that's the first start still counts, and so he had a great first start, and that's in the numbers. But yeah, I think that if Brady Singer goes on to have a good year and India ends the year with a 330 on base and no defensive home and struggling defensively, yeah, I think it becomes a bad trade. I still think it made sense at the time, but if you want to talk about batted ball metrics with India too, I don't know what it is. I don't know why everybody is underperforming, but I mean, his coming into tonight, well, I guess he didn't play, so it's still the same. 260 expected average, 386 expected slugging percentage compared to a 299 actual. You raise that average 30 points. Even if you don't add any walks, his on base percentage comes up, roughly 30 points. He's 260, 360, 390. You love the trade. It's a great trade. It's everything you wanted it to be. So I think that part of it is that things do even out over time, and we'll see how it goes. But right now, it's fair to criticize.
Yeah. What do you think would have to happen for? Because again, like, I don't have a problem with versatility as long as it's not kind of covering up the fact that there's not much plan there. If they settle in with him playing third the majority of the time, is that a solution? I mean, what do you think is the ideal? Let's just say, this is the low point of the Jonathan India season, and we do this again toward the end of the season, and we're saying all positive things about Jonathan India. What do you think that path looks like? I mean, obviously, again, first and foremost, it looks like him being a prototypical leadoff hitter. But in order for that to happen, you got to figure out the other side of the ball too. What is the pathway for him being a success in the season and fitting into this team? You think end up looking like?
Well, let me first go back to I think what the original plan was, and I have not been told this by anybody, but my thought on the original plan was he was going to play a lot of third, a little left, and some DH. And when he didn't play third, Garcia was going to play there. And when he did play third, Garcia was either going to sit on the bench or play center field, second base, left field, because Garcia, you remember they started the season with him as a super sub. Mm-hmm. And that super utility guy, kind of in the Ben Zobrist mold. He's going to play, 5 or 6 games a week, and there were spots for him. A couple of things happened. Obviously, Garcia hit like crazy, which was the biggest thing. But also, Garcia was probably going to play some second base against lefties when Michael Massey sat. Well, they faced 4 lefties in 38 games. That's thrown off a lot. That's been really weird for platoon situations because I think Matt Quatrero really wants to platoon, but they've faced almost all righties. So that's kind of thrown a plan off a little bit. So knowing that, I think that, and knowing now that Mikel Garcia is playing every day until further notice, I think the way it works, there are 2 paths. One, he becomes competent in left field, which he has had some misplays out there, but I also think he's been a lot better in the regular season than he was in spring training. I kind of wondered a little bit, does the third deck actually help for a guy learning the outfield? You're not dealing with the sky quite as much and crazy winds. So that's worth noting that he has been a lot better in regular season baseball than in Arizona baseball. So I think that to me the best path for Royal success is India figures out left field, Garcia's at third, Massey's at second. I think that is if that's the end result, that's the best thing for the Royals. But there's also a path where Mikel Garcia goes to second base, and I think he's athletic enough to be good there. I just don't think he's played there enough. And India plays third, and they get a trade acquisition, plays left, and Jack Caglione plays right. I don't know. Maybe it's Drew Waters. Maybe Drew Waters continues. The numbers on the metrics on Waters are not pretty. I don't think this will keep up, but it's been really nice to have a competent bat in his spot.
His defensive metrics, you mean, are not pretty?
No, well, they're not great either. But the offensive, I mean, a lot of swing and miss, a lot of chase, a lot of weak contact, but the results are good. And you at this point, the Royals just need results. You worry about tomorrow. They needed a bat today, and Drew Waters has provided that. I just don't know that I'd expect that for 140 or 124 more games.
Yeah,
I guess. And so you have to figure that out. But so I think that's the second path: is India at third most days and Garcia at second. But that leaves Massey out, and I think the Royals' offense is at its best when Michael Massey is hitting. And so best result, like I said, Massey at second, Garcia at third, India and left most days. I think that's where they get the most success out of the lineup. I'm not sure they'll get there, but I believe at this point is their hope.
So you touched on Drew Waters there. That kind of segues us perfectly into, I want to revisit my buddies who I have been recording the podcast with so far will like this because we're revisiting the 3 keys that we had to start the season, in our preseason pod. I only have my personal ones written down here, but it all seems to segue into this one. And so Waters is a perfect example because the first key I had written down was, I wanted to see a little more transactionality at the major league level. In other words, don't be, quite so hesitant to make some changes to the big league roster in real time. I think trading wise, we'd certainly established that JJ Piccolo had transactionality in him, but last year that kind of got under my skin a little bit because we heard all year was talk about how the Royals just had no depth. And I mean, certainly that was largely true. That's why they had to go get Yuli Gurriel the moment Pasquantino got hurt. But I also felt like, especially behind, they didn't have depth behind their best players, but I felt like in situations like, say, the outfield, which was a problem all year, there was somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that depth discussion because it's harder to sell the idea that you don't have anybody better until we see somebody else. And especially considering he'd played a little bit the year before, Drew Waters was a perfect example of there were plenty of opportunities for him last year, especially with the way MJ Melendez played, and we just didn't see it. Well, this year, MJ Melendez clearly on a short leash. It goes disastrously wrong. And, I suppose you could say that Mark Canna's little, whatever, he had some sort of tweaked leg muscle, I think. His short-term injury, that might have been really what opened the door for Waters as much as Melendez's struggles. But regardless, they've gotten there. And we've seen Drew Waters, like you said, maybe it doesn't look sustainable. I agree with you. I don't see him as a long-term solution, but we've seen it be an upgrade. And maybe even better example of the transactionality is, again, some of this you could say is forced on him by injury, but, Sam Long really struggles and then goes on the injured list. And so Evan Sisk comes up and fills in. Hunter Harvey gets hurt. Steven Cruz comes up and pitches and really hasn't given up the spot ever since. And then there's even been other guys who just come up to fill in very briefly who've excelled. Noah Cameron did very well in his start filling in for Reagans. You had Jonathan Bolin came up for the doubleheader and pitched well. I actually feel like, again, maybe we should be careful and not, give them too much credit for doing what they have to do. But I do feel like we've seen a slightly increased level of transactionality of the big league roster that we're not gonna tolerate struggles indefinitely, and we're gonna give everybody a chance whenever we see an opportunity. Do you feel like we've seen an improvement on that front?
Yes and no, because you're right. Most of it has come because they had to put a player on the injured list, and when you do that, you've got to go get somebody. So they're forced into a transaction. But what I have seen is, and we saw this last year too. To be fair, a much quicker role change. So Angel Serpa for the first week and a half, 2 weeks of the season was the fireman. It didn't work. It worked last year. For whatever it's worth, he stranded 75% of runners last year, which is about better than league average. And he got 52 inherited runners last year and traded 39 of them. So there was every reason to believe he could do that again because that's what he did last year. When that stopped, he stopped getting those spots. And he's had a couple here and there because you can't have two guys who never get any of those, and Stratton's in the bullpen still. So they changed that role. Michael Massey has gotten days off that I don't think he would be getting off if he was playing well. Jonathan India has gotten days off that I don't think he'd be getting off if he was playing well. Vinny got dropped to 7th in the lineup against lefties, and that he's still hitting third against righties. And again, they faced 4 lefties. That part's crazy to me. I keep coming back to that. And Mikel Garcia played his way into the lineup, and from bottom of the order to middle of the order to sometimes top of the order. So I think they've been functionally transactional, but not so much up and down using the minor league system. And you're right. Last year, they told us what they thought of the system. They told us what they thought of the upper level players, and it was a big old fart noise.
Yeah.
And you're right. When you go get a 40-year-old Yuli Gurriel who's got a hamstring injury, instead of calling up Nick Prado, you have telegraphed that you are going to DFA Nick Prado whenever you need a roster spot. You told the world, just do it. And then they did it in spring training.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would like to see a little more of that. And maybe it's kind of started. I mean, they got Peyton Wilson up to AAA a little earlier than they typically get guys up. That said, it was his 3rd trip in AA. So maybe that's not earlier. We've seen some movement. I think we're going to, not to derail this because everybody wants to hear this name, but I think we're going to see Caglione called up pretty soon to AAA. So I think maybe that's the start of the wheels turning to be a little bit more major league to minor league transactional. But I do appreciate that they are willing to change roles. And I don't think they've always been that way. I think it's always been, hey, look, this guy's our number 5 hitter. We're going to give him the full 40 games to figure it out. No. And they did it last year too. You might remember Will Smith was the closer. And in game 7, James MacArthur was working behind him in a save situation. So they clearly were like, all right, we thought this was going to work. Not so much. We're moving on real quick. So I appreciate that. I'm willing to hold judgment though on the up and down transactions until they feel more comfortable with the players they have down, which I think theoretically should come later this year and next year.
Yeah, maybe we got to do this again in a couple of weeks, and Jack Caglione will be a slightly more relevant discussion when he's up at AAA. But what's another example of something you'd like to see on that front? Because I think there's still some low-hanging fruit in AAA. I know the kind of the scuttlebutt on him is that Nick Lofton has kind of figured out that you can pad some minor league stats by essentially becoming a passive hitter. It's funny because I think Nick Prado did this a little bit too, like in the latter half of his minor league career, when it started becoming clear he really wasn't a major league hitter, and he'd always been a patient hitter. And Nick Lofton, even at the major league level, has shown plate discipline, but I feel like those guys sort of have shifted into a role of realizing you can pad minor league stats by being almost a passive hitter, because that's probably the biggest difference between minor league and major league pitchers is major leaguers, if they know your bat is no threat, they'll just pump strikes in there, whereas minor league pitchers sometimes will just not be able to throw a strike. And so you can
try.
but you can be a passive hitter and essentially pad your OBP. I know a lot of people think that's what's going on with Nick Lofton, but I wonder if we're maybe almost approaching that territory with Michael Massey, where you sort of have to ride the hot hand the way they did with Drew Waters a little bit. What do you think about that one? Or what's another example of one of those low-hanging fruit that you'd like to see, continue shuffling up and down the roster, up and down the organization?
Yeah, I think that one makes a lot of sense. And I think you're right. And the difference between Lofton and Prado is Lofton can make contact when he does swing.
That's true.
And so you're not going to get the strikeouts from him. And I think, this is just me talking out my what, but
Right.
I think he can probably shoot some balls foul, and Nick Prado just couldn't do that. So you'd get a lot of strikeouts from Prado because he did work the 3-2 count, whereas Lofton works the 3-2 count and hits 4 foul balls and then gets the 4th ball. So I think there's that. But yeah, I think at some point you've got to say, look, we're going to ride the hot hand, like you just said. And I said this earlier in the year. They might need to just be cycling outfielders until they can make an acquisition or get somebody up who takes the job and keeps it. Is it John Rave? He's got 4 homers in his last 3 games. Maybe he's the next guy for Hunter Renfroe or for Drew Waters at some point. I mean, it would not surprise me if in 10 days we're like, oh, Drew Waters cratered. So it's time to move on to the next guy. So maybe it's Rave, who's not on the 40-man. And to the Royals' credit, every team has been able to pick him for 2 years in the Rule 5, and not a single team has. And the Royals haven't added him to the roster. I like John Rave. I think he probably has earned a shot based on his play, but the league has shown us that they don't believe in him either. Maybe it's Tyler Gentry hasn't earned it, but maybe at some point it's him or whatever. But yeah, I think with the move that makes the most sense to me right now, well, there's one of two. It's either Massey going down. I think makes a lot of sense if he doesn't. I would give him maybe the weekend. I don't even know why, but whatever. And then say, look, you need a reset. And it's the same message they sent with MJ Melendez. Good players get sent down. Players who have long careers sometimes go to the minor leagues for a month-long reset. It happens. Don't think it doesn't mean we don't love you, all that. I think Nick Lofton's a guy, or Cam Devaney, who hasn't been as good since he came back from his injury, but he was tearing the cover off the ball for the first, 2.5 weeks of the season. And again, it's find the hot hand, whoever it is, and act quick. This goes back to the transactional part. Act quickly when you realize, okay, this hot hand is over, and now it's time to try the next guy. And if that guy doesn't work, we're going to give him 10 days. We're not going to tell him that, but we're going to give him 10 days. And if that doesn't work, we're going to try the next guy. And then eventually you get to July and you say, okay, Taylor Ward's now a Royal, or what he's been terrible this year too. But I think that's how you get through this up until you can acquire somebody.
Do guys like Rave or Gentry at least, I believe is on the 40-man, I think.
Yeah, he is.
Okay, so do guys like that who have little to no major league track record, have they now leapfrog? Because, obviously most of this is coming back to the outfield. That's where there's the need for transactionality. Have those guys leapfrogged MJ Melendez coming back? Like what's got to happen for that to be part of the revolving door there? Because, I don't think they've given up on him completely, but, I don't know that's a good idea either.
I think MJ Melendez is a different case because I don't think they sent him down to get 2 weeks of it. I think if they send Massey down, it's, hey, we're going to get you a 2, 3, 4 week reset.
Kind of like Moustakas years back.
Yeah. I think MJ Melendez was sent down to work on things. And I don't know this, but I would not be surprised if we found out in 15 years, 8 years, whatever, that they said, look, it is whatever date it was, April 19th or something. You're not coming back until the All-Star break at least. You're going to be in AAA. Get it right. Figure it out. Don't press to come back to the majors because you're not coming back up, knowing that if he did go down there and just light the world on fire, they could do it. And I guess it's a little bit like parenting that when you go, you can go back on your word once, but once you've done that, you can't do it again. But knowing that, I think so. I don't think he's an option right now. And he would be if he had hit when he went down, but he has not been good since he went down to the minors. Which, on that note, I'm willing to give him a little time because they are making changes with him. Let the guy adjust. That said, these numbers are bad. So yeah, I think that those guys have leapfrogged him a little bit right now just because of the timing. Nelson Velasquez is another guy, and he got removed from the 40-man also, like Prado. That's a disappointment. Where would they be if they had August and September 2023 Velasquez?
Man,
it'd be nice. They'd feel a whole lot better about things.
He could have. He would probably be what got Renfroe out of town if that had happened. It'd be something.
Yeah,
else.
You're right.
All right. So the second key I had. This is by far the one, for obvious reasons, that I'm most excited about. It was no secret to any of us who follow the more advanced stats that Mikel Garcia was. I mean, you talked about several different guys and their actual versus expected performance. I actually don't know so much about like what his expected slash lines and stuff were, but I know that, if you go off of the StatCast and the Savant data, that, you're talking about a guy who was last year was, top 10, 15% in, chase rate and uh, hard hit rate, at least in past. And so, I mean, a guy that just the lack of production was not supported by his underlying batted ball metrics. And it seems like it's all coming to a head this year because, that was the one thing I said going into the season is if there's one player that the Royals just absolutely need to break out or to reach his ceiling, it's Garcia because, I've even tweeted this a couple times in his best moments, like the leadoff homer last year. I've I've referred to him as like the best case scenario for him is Diet Bobby because he doesn't have the raw talent that Bobby Witt Jr. does, but he has just this broad array of a skill set, and it looks like it's all coming to a head for him. Do you think he can sustain this?
I mean, one of the first things I do when a player has a run like he's on is you go to Baseball Savant, which is kind of lazy, but also it's there. Why not? And you look at his page, and when you get there, there's this percentile rankings. You know this.
Mm-hmm.
Can I give him the background?
Yeah.
And it's all these sliders, and red is good, blue is bad. And let's see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 13 batting metrics. All the way, it's expected stats like weighted OBA, expected batting average, slugging percentage, exit velocity, barrels, all that. He is red, like dark red, in 7 of them, and which is great.
Yeah.
He is light red. Well, probably 8 of them. He's dark red in 8 of them. Light red in 3 more. And then he doesn't swing the fastest bat. He's 49th percentile. He's league average. That speed doesn't always correlate with success. And his barrel percentage is low. So those are the 2 spots that he's quote unquote struggled. But I mean, you look at the chase rate, 91st percentile. He squares it up. 99th percentile, 37.8% of the time. So he's making good contact. His average exit velocity is 93rd percentile. The hard hit rate is 90th percentile. These are things that regulate pretty quickly, and provided he doesn't change his approach, which I think is what happened last year a little bit. As long as he sticks with this approach, I don't know that he's going to hit. What is he hitting now after today? 330, 325, whatever it is. I don't know that you're going to see like batting champion type numbers.
It would be regular Bobby. That would be original Bobby.
Right. But okay, so right now Mikel Garcia is hitting 323 with a 392 OBP and 496 slugging percentage. So he really is diet 2024 Bobby, just missing the slugging percentage. 151 weighted runs created plus, which means he's 51% above league. That's incredible. I don't know that he's that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that he's not, but the success I think can be replicated. I think that you look, he's got a 356 batting average on balls in play. That's probably a little elevated. Although it was 344 in 2023.
He has a high BABIP kind of profile.
Yeah, he's not as fast as you'd think, but he is a guy who should theoretically run a higher BABIP. Last year was 268. So that tells some of the story. I mean, yeah, I think what he's doing makes sense. It adds up, and he's learning too, and I think I think he's just getting better. And I actually wonder, he didn't play winter ball because I forgot what injury he had. Was it a thumb?
Oh, yeah.
He had some kind of issue that he was really bummed out. I know that.
Yeah.
But he looks a lot, and this is easy to say in hindsight, he looks fresher to me. I don't know if he is, but I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of benefit from getting a winter off for the first time in who knows how many years. I mean, we're all refreshed on Mondays, right?
Oh yeah,
it's the same thing. And I don't know. I'm wondering if that has something to do with it. But yeah, the profile, it checks out. And I could see this lasting.
Let's give us a little more context there so we can keep an eye on this stuff. So, some of it is intuitive. Chase rate is swinging at pitches out of the strike zone. You've got hard hit rate, which is balls above a certain exit velo
95,
threshold. Yeah, 95. And then, the ones that always get me and the ones that I never know which ones to put more value on are like squared up rate and then like barrel rate. So I assume squared up, I would assume, is what you get when you combine hard hit and that, sweet spot of launch angle. I think it's like 10 to 30, maybe 10 to 25 degrees, that kind of that line drive territory. And then barrel, I think, might have to do more with exactly where you make contact, like where in the zone the ball is, where the bat is. Give us a little more context there so we know what to watch out for. Because that, the one stat you said that he's not, well, there was a couple that weren't read, but the one that he's really not excelling in, and I'd heard that before, was barrel rate. Can you put a little bit of context on that for us?
Yeah, so squared up rate I just pulled this up to get the exact numbers because I wanted to make sure I said this correctly. It's a swing where at least 80% of the potential exit velocity, which is based on swing speed and pitch speed, is converted into actual exit velocity.
Okay.
So if the potential exit velocity is 100 and he hits, well, that seems low. I don't know. Maybe I'm off on that. But that's basically, if you get most of the exit velocity you're quote unquote supposed to, you square it.
Don't miss your pitch, essentially, is what squaring up.
Yeah. The barrel that's where it's the ideal combination of exit velocity and
launch angle.
Launch angle. Yeah. So, and to be barreled, like I said, I wanted to read this to get it correct. A batted ball requires an exit velocity of at least 98 miles per hour, so more than just hard hit.
Mm-hmm.
And at that speed in particular, balls struck with a launch angle between 26 and 30 degrees will be barreled.
Okay.
The range for launch angle expands the higher it is. So if you hit at 110, you can, I think it's like 20 to or 19 to 36 or something. I remember. I don't know the exact number. This shows if you hit at 116, the barrel threshold is any ball with a launch angle between 8 and 50 degrees. So there is some level of barrel is important, but also sometimes you kind of have to get the context in there.
So what you're saying is Jack Caglione is going to be the king of barrels because it doesn't matter what angle he hits it at, his exit velos. My goodness,
yeah.
we got to get to that one in future pods because he's going to destroy these sorts of conversations and metrics.
Oh, he's going to be Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge. I really want him to get to AAA, not because, I want him to get to AAA, but they have StatCast metrics in AAA now, and they don't in AA. And I'm tired of having to, hey, do you have this number? Hey, you texting and calling and waiting for Sean Mernon to tweet it on. I would like to just be able to look it up and go, wow, he hit that home run 117.4 miles per hour. And I'm really excited for that. But yes, so it's all important. I think the big thing, and I think the important thing here, hit the ball hard, good things will happen. There are very few hitters. I don't even know if there are any who are in the 90th percentile or higher in hard hit rate who are bad hitters.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to hit the ball hard more than half the time and not be good. And so I hit the ball hard, good things will happen. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
There's more to it, obviously, but that's why I look at it all the time. It's just it feels important to me. And look at the top. Okay, Mikel Garcia came into play today 18th in average exit velocity. Shohei Ohtani, O'Neal Cruz, Aaron Judge, Rafael Devers, Pete Alonso, Gunnar Henderson, Jonathan Aranda, Nolan Jones. That's interesting. Matt Olson, Fernando Tatis Jr., Kyle Schwarber, Yordan Alvarez, Juan Soto, Matt Chapman, Corbin Carroll, Ryan McMahon. Interesting. Ben Rice. Those are the 17 ahead of him. I don't know what Nolan Jones. I haven't even looked at what Nolan Jones is doing this year.
His numbers aren't too great, but he hit an absolute. I actually watched some of the Guardians game yesterday. He hit a second decker to right what's that word?
He can really. Now he's also only got 54 batted ball events compared to Garcia's got 105.
Yeah,
there's some of that. And Ryan McMahon, when he makes contact,
he homered tonight. Incidentally, we keep bringing these guys up, and they're hot. So
they need to pay us. But I mean, you look at those names. Is there anybody, again, Nolan Jones and Ryan McMahon are the two you're like, but, and then right behind him, Freddie Freeman, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Adolis Garcia. He's not having a great year. Manny Machado, Yandy Diaz, Austin Riley. I mean, the names go on and on and on. hit the ball hard, good things happen.
It's curious. I want to get to this last key here real quick before I let you go. But you brought that up, and it's funny because I've had these exact conversations with some of my more old school family members and friends who are look at baseball more from an old school perspective. And of course, they are not generally huge fans of a lot of these stats, but you talk about bat speed, and you even mentioned it earlier, like the high bat speed doesn't always correlate to good results, but obviously that's generally how you're going to generate hard contact and have a good hard hit rate. Do you think that could have either anything to do with them regressing so much in the clutch hitting situations? You talked about hunting RBIs. What do you think the strategy should be there? Because, bat speed does seem to be kind of what's the word I'm looking for? In the chain of events, or the chain of a building block of a good offensive player. Cells make up organs make up organ systems. Bat speed makes up hard hit rate. Hard hit rate makes up good expected stats. Expected stats are generally supposed to be where your actual stats equate to. Do you think that there could be a guy, maybe Vinny Pasquantino is a decent example, could some of these stats and players being so aware of them and emphasizing them, could it be to their detriment? Do they focus too much on things like this themselves? How do you think you fit this in when you're talking about what drives some of the performances we're seeing this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think every player is obviously different. There's something like Chris Bubich thrives on analytics, and
right.
The more he knows, the better. Some guys, they don't want to know. They want to be told. They want somebody else to figure it out. They don't realize this, that they like the analytics. They just don't want to deal with it themselves, because every player wants to be better, and they don't realize that they don't care. It doesn't matter how they get better as long as they get better. But yeah, I do think that there is some level of, all right, this may actually be hurting him. Like, and you mentioned Vinny Pasquantino, the whole thing about him getting stronger and swinging harder, and his timing got screwed up because of it. You don't think about that stuff. And to go back to the original part of what you were asking about issues with runners in scoring position, this is where, so clutch isn't a thing.
Right.
It's just not. But there are hitters who, I think non-clutch is kind of a thing. And I also think that pressing is a thing. And so what do you do when you press? You swing harder. You grip the bat tighter. George Brett used to talk about it all the time. And it's also funny listening to George Brett. He's kind of anti-analytics, but everything he does is actually analytics. He just doesn't realize it. Everything he talks about. But he talks about, you get in a slump, you grip the bat tighter, you swing the bat harder. You don't benefit from that. So you're making contact at the wrong point in front of the plate. And that's what these things are measuring is, okay, I'm swinging harder. I'm making contact an inch farther out. Like Jonathan India is a great example. I noticed he was farther up in the box this year, about 3 inches farther up in the box. He was making contact about 4 inches ahead of where he was last year. I also noticed a couple weeks ago, I'm at the game, my seats are in a great spot. He is back at the back line of the box again. All of a sudden, he's got a 412 on base percentage over his last 10 games. And so these things are important, but I do think there are some hitters who say, I have to swing harder. I have to swing earlier. I have to do, this or that. And it takes them out of their game. And maybe it's consciously or subconsciously. So I think there's some of that. I think there's a little information overload. But, ultimately, like I said, every player wants to be better. And whether they realize it or not, analytics and utilizing them properly is going to make them better.
Sure. Well, that kind of takes us perfectly into the last thing here before we wrap up. We've been talking to David Lesky of Inside the Crown here. Follow his Substack and his blog and also his YouTube channel. And once we build up this subscriber count a little more, I've got some subscriptions to David's blog to share as well. So check all his work out. I want to ask you about that. It's because it's an organizational trend was my third key of, some of the ire's been directed toward Alex Zumwalt, and I don't think that's unfair. But, last year it was a mixed bag at best in terms of just up and down the organization, the development of the hitting prospects. We kind of touched on Nick Lofton, how he seems to have really settled into a patient approach kind of role. Caglianone's certainly been hitting the ball well, but Gavin Cross down in Double. I was just in Springfield this past weekend to see that game, and Caglianone, Carter Jensen had a couple nice at bats, but kind of keeping an eye on the general stats down there. Outside of Caglianone, not too many of them popped. I'm looking.
I got to stop you real quick because this is so funny. Gavin Cross has hit 2 home runs tonight.
All we got to do is talk about guys.
Yes. You know who
But
else has been terrible?
yeah, let's see. God, Hunter Renfroe. Is this work? Can we do it? Does this maybe tomorrow afternoon? Hunter Renfroe goes nuclear, hits 2-3 homers.
You know what? They play early. They play a 1:00 game, so we're within the 24-hour window.
Yeah. So I don't know, but like, I feel like it's very much a mixed bag. Obviously, it's still the minor league season is even younger than the major league season because it starts later. But I don't know. I feel decent with optimism for even better on the first one about transactionality. Love where the Mikel Garcia thing's going, of course. This one's still, a bit of a mixed bag. Caglianone's been nice, but it's funny because I literally have a note here under this third key of what I said on the last pod was, a better trend of hitting development up and down the organization, but also especially not Caglianone, meaning, kind of like last year or even this year, the Bobbies and the Jack Caglianes, you expect those guys to hit. It's about the supporting cast. And I am a tad underwhelmed what I'm seeing by the rest of the minor league cast. How do you feel about the hitting trends organizational wide?
So bigger picture, this has been years ago, but somebody once told me when an organization undergoes a change, it takes 3 years for a program to go into effect, truly, like to really see it. You see it in the lower levels quickly, but it takes a little while. This is the third year of JJ without Dayton, and it's not great offensively. I mean, I'm looking at the Naturals lineup right now. They're playing. They're in the 10th inning. They're tied with Wichita, but you look up down the lineup. Carter Jensen, 217 average, 607 OPS. Spencer Nivens, who had a phenomenal second half last year, 210 average, 610 OPS. They just signed Rudy Martin back, which I have funny stories about him that we don't have time for, but we can go into those another time.
Yeah.
But you go into like Quad Cities, and Austin Charles has had a terrible start to the season. I mean, he has just been. I think he's hitting like 125. Batting average is what it is, but when you're 125, it's bad.
Yeah.
Carson Rocafort, like not good. 184 average, 745 OPS. He's hit for some power, but that's about it. You get down to Columbia, down in low A. Ramon Ramirez has hit well. Derlin Figueroa, who they got for Ryan Yarbrough, has hit really well. Asbel Gonzalez has been really good, stolen a ton of bases. Brendan McNair has shown some power. So there are some signs down there, but yeah, up and down the system, it's not great. And Blake Mitchell missed some time, so maybe he's a case study for down the road. I think he's in Arizona now rehabbing, but it hasn't been wonderful. And I think if they get to the end of the year and this doesn't change, I think they're going to have to make some organizational changes. And it opens up a new 3-year window, which nobody wants to hear. But on the pitching side, I feel like they've figured some things out, and we haven't seen the results yet of that totally, but we have seen a lot of it at the big league level. But they need better out of their offensive development, and it's just not there yet. And if in my opinion, there's not a whole lot you can do midseason in that regard. So let it ride, I guess. But in my opinion, if it doesn't pick up this year, they're gonna have go out. Hire away whoever's running the Red Sox hitting or whoever's second in command there in their system because they're churning out hitters. Go to the Dodgers actually haven't been great at it recently. They've been fine, but not wonderful. But go find the hitting Brian Sweeney. Go find the hitting and make that change. And maybe it starts at the top. Maybe Alex Zumwalt should go back to the role he was in before, which he was very good at. And maybe it's just time for a different voice organizationally. But again, like I said, there's not a whole lot you can do midseason there. You look at the Rangers. Brett Boone's not going to help their hitting because of anything he teaches. It's a mindset thing there. So you want to make that move? Sure. I was joking with some people. You want to move Alex Zumwalt, bring Carlos Beltran in with Mike Tozar. Get those two together. You get a figurehead in Beltran, get him back on a bench. And he wants to be a manager that gets him back on a big league bench after all that stuff. Tozar worked with Soler in 2019 and Salvi and all that. Maybe you find something there. I don't know. And then you figure it out after the season. If you're going to do that, that's a move you can make. I don't know that it makes a difference outside of a mindset. That actually can change things. But after the season, you've probably got to make some moves.
Are you banging the trash can for Carlos Beltran?
Yes, 100%. I've set up an algorithm that tracks every pitch, and every time the Royals swing through a 94-mile-per-hour fastball down the middle, I whack that trash can for him. It's the calling card.
Awesome. David, great stuff, man. Again, guys, make sure you subscribe to his blog. We'll be gifting away some subscriptions as the channel continues to grow. And David, this has all been pretty smooth sailing. Let's do it again sometime, man. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. I'm in.
All right. David Lesky here with us. Stay tuned for more on the Calling It How I See It Sports